All right, so question number 8 is a mutation in its signal recognition particle that eliminates its GTPase activity would be predicted to have what effect on the secretory pathway. All right, so first things first, we need to figure out, recall the secretory pathway, which is shown here based on a figure from your book. All right, so SRP is the little purple square there, and it performs a variety of roles within this pathway. So we need to figure out how the GTPase portion, or what role that plays in this whole cycle. All right. So the very first thing here, I forgot to start the video. All right, we're going to zoom ahead a little bit. All right, there's SRP. All right, so the role of SRP is basically to bind to the signal peptide as it's coming off the ribosome. All right, recognize that this newly synthesized protein is supposed to be excreted. It then binds to the SRP receptor, blocks translation of on the ribosome, and allows the peptide to be threaded through to the ER. All right, so SRP is an example of a G protein. G proteins basically have two different states, a GTP bound state and a GDP bound state. All right, the way they convert from the GTP state to the GDP state is by hydrolyzing GTP to create GDP and phosphate. All right, this activity is called GTPase activity. So G proteins are enzymes that catalyze a GTPase function. All right, to go backwards from GDP to GTP, we do an exchange reaction. So the GDP falls out and a new GTP comes in. All right, the GDP itself does not get physically turned into GTP. That portion of the process is an exchange reaction. All right, so the way I like to think about G proteins working is the GTP bound state is the on state. All right, so whatever function our G protein has is turned on when it has GTP bound. The GDP bound form is the off state, and the GTPase function basically resets the whole process. So once our protein binds the GTP, turns on, the GTPase function basically is like a clock that started ticking. And so our GT protein will only remain turned on for a certain amount of time that depends on the nature of the G protein. All right. So for SRP, its functions that get turned on by GTP binding are, first of all, binding to signal peptide as it's coming off the ribosome. Secondly, once it binds to the signal peptide, it turns off the ribosome. And thirdly, it binds to its receptor on the ER membrane, anchoring the ribosome and allowing the new peptide to get threaded through the translocon. All right, so with GTP bound, those functions are turned off. Those functions are turned on with GTP bound. All right, now, thinking about the question. All right, so this mutation in the question is basically eliminating the GTPase function of SRP. So it would still be able to bind to signal peptide. It would still be able to bind to its receptor and still be able to turn off translation. All right, but this part here, the GTP gets converted to GDP, and the system turns off. That can't happen anymore. So the ribosome at this stage remains turned off. All right, and the SRP can't release from the signal peptide or from its receptor.